Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today it's a real privilege to have as my guest Dr. J.R. Briggs. J.R. is the author of a brand new book out from InterVarsity Press called The Art of Asking Better Questions, Pursuing Stronger Relationships, Healthier Leadership, and Deeper Faith. As you might guess, we go into a deep dive into the art of asking really powerful and compelling questions. And as part of this conversation, I actually am going to allow the tables to be turned on me, and JR is going to model some of the things that he teaches by actually asking me a series of questions as well. Before we get into the heart of the podcast, I do want to remind you that you can get in touch with me at brianrussellphd.com. You can also just check out that website, brianrussellphd.com. I invite you to subscribe, like, and share this podcast. Leave reviews where you found it. That's an easy way that you can help out the podcast. All of the resources that I discuss with JR, there will be links in the show notes, and any of those links that are Amazon, if you follow them and then just go and shop for whatever, even if you don't want one of the books we're talking about, that's a way that you can help this show because Amazon does pay me a small fee. I am really grateful for you being in the audience, and if I can be of any service, feel free to reach out. And now let's go to my conversation with JR. Welcome to the Deep Dive podcast, JR. It's great to meet you and have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Good to be with you.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And just a question I'd like to start with, and this is meant to be brief, so I will put briefly. Can you kind of share some of your key moments in your journey that's brought you to this place now where you do some coaching, you consult, you write, you teach, and most recently you're the author of a book that comes out on October 7th, The Art of Asking Better Questions.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Yeah, my story, I grew up in a Christian home, a quote-unquote boring story. They're never boring, but maybe more commonplace. And I always knew I wanted to go into ministry. Felt in sixth grade a call to ministry, which I know many sixth graders don't have that, but by God's grace, I'm grateful for that. And knew that would in many ways would be in a local church setting, but also found that the Lord was also expanding my understanding and expression of what ministry would look like. So I've had a chance to teach in Christian colleges and seminaries. I started an organization called Kairos Partnerships, which pastors, shepherds, and leads leaders. And so we work with hungry kingdom leaders who are feeling ill-equipped, overwhelmed, lonely, unhealthy, and stuck so that they don't have to be. And so that's I don't know if that's as brief as you want, but that's a little bit of my journey and what leads us up to today.
Yeah, and I guess in particular, I'm just curious about the new book that you wrote. Not everybody writes a book about asking questions. So what's the kind of backstory to that book?
Yeah, I've co-written, or contributed to 15 books, but this has always been my passion project, always. And the other books I believe in and still believe that there's value there, but I always knew I had one still left in me. And there may be more later, I don't know, but this one has always been kind of the burning in my bones Jeremiah kind of thing. And the reason being is because I have seen that modeled well. I have seen lives changed. I have seen people that chose to have a posture of good question asking, and how much more interesting and engaging and hospitable their lives were. And I've also seen others that didn't ask questions, didn't want to learn how to ask better questions, and their lives were pretty small, which sent me on a deep dive to study the questions of Jesus and realizing, okay, he's the way, the truth, and the life, but he asks over 300 questions. Wow. I study his miracles, his parables, his healings, his teachings. I had never studied his questions. And so for the last 10 years, I've been doing a deep dive on not just questions, but the questions of God. If God knows everything, why would he ask them? And on Jesus. And then it led me to work on my deepen project on equipping leaders to ask better questions for the sake of the kingdom. And so my doctoral advisor said, you know what, you need to turn this into a book. And so it was in that process of taking it from the academic up here to bringing the cookies to the bottom shelf to make it an accessible book for everyone.
Yeah, and I actually really like the kind of, it's almost a tagline that you have, and it kind of reminds me of Tony Robbins a little bit. It's that you have that line, the quality of your questions determines, no, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions, or how you phrase that. And I
Hmm.
really like that. And about, in what is it? It's with about yourself, about God, and about others, or something like that.
Yes, all three of those are incredibly important because the questions we ask ourselves impacts the questions we ask God. The questions we ask God impacts the questions we ask others, and then the questions we ask others impact the questions we ask ourselves. So it's all connected in there. And I just have found that the dimensions of your life expand or shrink depending upon the questions that you ask. And so if we refrain from asking questions, our world gets smaller. But when we start to want to fall in love with asking better questions and learn some practices and skills, our world begins to expand and the quality of other people's lives, not just ours, it grows as well as we see this as a way of questions are such a tangible expression of compassion and of hospitality.
Have you found, because I teach biblical studies, as we talked about briefly, and I teach at an evangelical school, and you're from that back kind of conservative back Christian background as well. So it seems like it's hard sometimes for Christians to at least ask challenging questions about God, at least, maybe not so much about themselves or about other people, but how have you found ways to facilitate a student, like not being afraid to say something heretical in the classroom out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, and one of the things I do is I send them right to the scriptures to say, let's look at the questions that are there. God asks a ton of questions when he doesn't have to, but especially in the Psalms. You look at the questions in the Psalms, I mean, especially the Psalms of Lament. I mean, those are some rated R Psalms, and there are some rated R questions in those Psalms. And God says, David, don't ever ask that again. You're crazy. No, what does he say? You're a man after my own heart. So here's a man after his own heart that can still ask these rated R questions. And I think we have fallen for the lie that says if we ask questions of God, that will stunt our spiritual growth and formation. And I actually think that our spiritual formation and growth in Christ will actually be stunted if we don't ask more questions. What I'm not advocating for, Brian, and I know you picked up on this in the book, it's not questioning. I'm not. This is not about trying to create more doubt, but it's asking questions as a way of drawing in, even intense questions of being drawn in with God. And so realizing that the scriptures, especially the Psalms, give us permission, capital P permission, to be able to ask questions, honest, raw, buck naked questions of God. And he's okay with that and welcomes that. And that's a real gift. And so that's I just send Christians to the scriptures to say if this is okay here in our canon, I think it's okay in our journals and our lives as well.
And I guess it's about what, halfway through, two-thirds of the way through, you have the two chapters. Yeah, it's two chapters where you kind of cover the Old Testament, New Testament questions. I'm curious. Can you do questions that are asked by God of others, and then also all the questions that Jesus asks? Um, do you have, like, what's your favorite question that maybe God asks of someone in the Old Testament, and what's your favorite question that Jesus asks, and why do those resonate with you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to narrow down entirely because there's so many good ones, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he asks Hagar, "Where have you come from and where are you going?" Which is fantastic. Or Elijah, "What are you doing here?" To Sarah, "Is there anything too hard for the Lord?" If I can narrow it down to one, I love preaching through Numbers 11, which I'm sure your listeners that was their morning devotion. So I don't want to belabor the point here. But Numbers 11 is they're complaining. We ate so well back in Egypt, and I love that rhetorical, forceful question from God where he says, is anything, he says, the Lord's arm too short? And I just love that. And those times when I'm tempted to worry or complain or grumble, that question comes into my mind. Is the Lord's arm too short? So that's a big one that's really important to me. It's hard to narrow down the most important question for me of Jesus. I think it depends on seasons for me. I'm struck by the question in John 5, do you want to be well? To the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda. I'm also thinking of the Bartimaeus question, where he says, what do you want me to do for you? And I live in Philadelphia, so the little bit of the snark can come out where you say, I don't know, Jesus. Take a wild guess. The guy can't see. But of course, Jesus knew. But there are times I think Jesus asks us a question, and he asked Bartimaeus that because he needed Bartimaeus to know what Bartimaeus wanted. And I think that's really important. I think Jesus asks us questions not just for information, but for connection and participation, and to force us to think differently than we would if we just dealt with answers.
It's good. It's actually funny that I think the Bartimaeus question, that's my favorite question, at least over the last year, that's my favorite question that Jesus has asked. I ask myself that a lot. How would I actually answer? And it's not always really as easy as you think it would be to answer, honestly.
No, and Brian, you're right. Sometimes I can answer that in 30 seconds, and other times it has taken me 6 months to really wrestle with, what do I really want? And, that's, in John, who are you seeking? That's another big one. So as you could tell, there's just too many. When I'm really hungry, I love the question where he says, brothers, do you have anything to eat, after the resurrection? So that Jesus loves to eat, which we can laugh and say, yeah, he was hungry. But I think it's so important to remind people, that isn't just a surface question. Ghosts don't eat. Humans eat. And what a way to communicate to those disciples. I'm back in human form. I'm back in bodily flesh here. I am not a ghost. And anyway, there's all sorts of layers. I just love them. And so I could probably list 50 more, Brian, but those are some that I love.
I want to go back to just the writing of the book itself. Like when I picked it up and I was trying to flip through it at first, I was like to kind of get the 50,000-foot view, and I always thought to myself, like, how did he do this? It's like I could usually conceptualize how to write pretty much a book on pretty much anything, but it's like, how did you figure out how to organize a book about just asking questions? And I know it's kind of a vague question, but it's just I'm just interested in how did you put this thing together?
You know what? I've never been asked that, and I'm really glad you asked it. I'm grateful for it. To me, I wanted to think of it like a funnel, really wide at the top of like, what are questions, why, just to be really general on that, and then to get into some of the things like the questions God asks, the questions that Jesus asked, that we can ask God questions, even talk about questions in leadership. And then toward the end, the smallest part of the funnel was to get ridiculously practical on what are some practices we can do? Let's say people are convinced in the first 2/3. I get it. Questions are important. So what do I do now, JR? And I really wanted to be ridiculously practical. One chapter's on some practices you can do before you have a conversation with someone. Then there are things you can do in a conversation, and then things you can do after the conversation is over. A bit of a after action review, a way to reflect back on how it went. So I was really trying to think in terms of a funnel. And I was really trying to think in 3 categories. The first one being generally, why are questions important? Why don't we ask more in our culture? What are the barriers? So kind of a cultural, informational. The second one was more biblical and personal. And the third one was very practical. So that's kind of the funnel, and the 3 waves was the intent of how I was trying to organize the writing of the book.
And talk also, like I thought just from a purely practical level, because you could pretty much open the book and every page or two you have little inset boxes with questions. The whole, I guess it's the appendix, you have a list of questions from different Christian authors or about different topics, all super helpful. So if somebody wants to pick this up and just wants a bunch of journaling questions, I mean, you could use the book that way very practically. But so do you literally have like question banks? How would you suggest a person like collects questions? I mean, I like to collect them too. I'm just curious what you do.
Yes. I keep one analog and one digital. So I've got the notes section of my phone. When I come across a good question, could be one that I've thought of, one that I've heard, one that I read about, overheard at a coffee shop, I immediately want to write it down. I don't want to think, oh, I'll remember later. We never do. So I try to pull that up quickly and put that on the list. I also have a journal, and in the back page of my journal, of every new journal that I have, it lists questions. And those are the questions that I'm thinking through in that season. Because some questions are universal and good for all of time. And sometimes they're very personal and sometimes they're seasonal. And so it's always fun for me to look back and say, oh, yeah, in this really hard season I was in, these were the kind of questions that I was asking. Or this was a really flourishing season. I mean, it was just a season of blessing and joy and excitement. I was asking a different set of questions than I was in that hard season previously. And so it becomes something I can refer back to, but also that I can log as a way of saying, yep, that's the questions I was asking myself, God, and others in that particular season is a way of me remembering what I wrote in the journal during that time. So that when people say, what's the most practical thing we can do? That's it. Write it down. Write it down. Have a commonplace notebook. It could be a Google Doc. It could be a notebook. It could be a note section of your phone, an index card. But find a place where regularly you can add to that, and then refer back to those on occasion.
Yeah, thank you. I want to talk theoretical about what makes questions good. And you have several different like charts I think are really helpful. And you have the stuff about like the 4 levels of questions. So you can kind of answer this one any way you want to. But like, what are maybe key values or commitments that help us to be better at asking questions? And yeah, I'll just leave it open-ended like that.
Sure. Well, there are 4 pillars or 4 essentials if we're going to ask great questions. Some of it may seem obvious, but it's good to name. No one had named it for me. Number one, you can't ask a question if you're not curious first, right? I mean, that seems foundational, but it's good to name that. And so one of the things we do is how do we cultivate curiosity? If we want to ask better questions, we need to learn to be more curious. So curiosity is number 1. Number 2, we need to have wisdom. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of questions that are out there. We need the wisdom to know how do we ask the right question at the right time to the right person for the right motive, with the right motive. And so wisdom to know of all the questions, what should I ask? So curiosity, wisdom. The third one is humility. If we're asking a question, inherent to the question is admitting I don't know the answer, which means I've got to be humble enough to say, I don't know. I don't know. So that's the third thing. And then the fourth pillar is courage. Because if I'm going to show you I don't know, I risk looking dumb, unintelligent, out of touch. And so it takes courage to be able to ask a question. Maybe lowercase c courage or capital C courage on a riskier question. And so those are 4 elements that exist there. And Heather Holleman, who teaches at Penn State, she wrote a book called The 6 Conversations, and she said all questions can be boiled down to one of 2 purposes: information or connection. And that's been really helpful. And it could be connections of with people or connections to new ideas, new possibilities, new awareness, but also information. What time does the ball game start tonight? It's just a simple informational question, which are good. And if we can learn to ask informational and connectional questions and be aware of those to start, that's the best thing we can do.
You mentioned Larry King as somebody you used to watch when you were younger, and I guess we're about the same age, so I remember Larry King too, and I enjoyed his program. I guess it was on CNN if I remember right, but he was kind of old school. Who do you, you think of contemporary people, and there's famous podcasters and interviewers today. Who do you find like who's a contemporary right now that asks really good questions that you learn from still?
Yeah. I don't watch her often, but I think that's one of the reasons why Oprah is still so revered and at the top of her game, because people, when they're done, they say, I've never told anybody that, and now I'm telling Oprah with millions of people watching. And they are asked, why did you share? And I said, because I just sensed that she really wanted to know, that she really connected and cared for me and showed great empathy and curiosity. So I think that's one of the reasons why she's at the top of her game. I'm a sports fan, and so on a sports side of things, I actually think Dan Patrick on the Dan Patrick Show is a really good question asker. And I've always appreciated that about him. He's willing to ask the questions of the athletes and the guests that he has on that makes, if you notice, the athletes chuckle. And I think they're a little bit caught off guard, not embarrassed, but they're like, almost as if to say, wow, no one's ever asked me that question before in all the interviews I've ever done. And so I think that's why he gets so many guests coming back on the show when they're very busy, because they say, this is fresh. This is interesting. These are new questions. These are not lazy questions. So I think Dan Patrick's another good one as well.
That's really good. And this is probably a out of left field question about asking questions, but I'm curious. I have AI, I have Chat
Hmm.
GPT, Gemini, these Grok. Have
Hmm.
have you worked with any of those in terms of generating questions? And I'm curious what you think about their capacity to help us ask better questions or maybe
Hmm.
revise questions that we want to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And it will only become more and more of a significant question. I'm getting this question more and more often. It is a fantastic, AI is a fantastic servant and a terrible master. And if we can keep that in mind, that this is a tool that it serves us, we don't serve the tool, it can be helpful. So some may do that. I mean, I think the advocates of AI would say if you learn to ask better questions, you're going to get better results in that. Just like with Google, um, I what that can do is provide more information, maybe some new ideas, but it still cannot create a relational connection in the way humans can. Although there is a growing concern, especially among males, adult males, who have quote unquote fallen in love with chatbots and with AI generated relationships, which is scary to think about. And so, why is that? And so, I'm trying to explore, as not a tech expert here, but as a question lover, what's the draw behind that? And I think it goes back to the fact that we were all created, the image of God stamped on inside of us and on our lives to know and be known, you know? And and so if others around us, there's a lot of question deserts. So if others aren't asking questions around us, that even a machine which we don't fully understand, if a machine can ask me questions where I feel loved and seen and heard and listened to, I think there's some people that say I'll take it because it draws on that urge to be truly known and connected with. So I think we're still too early to fully, for even at least for me, to offer a robust and confident answer. But it is one that I'm watching carefully unfold. I think Google was great at information. AI is creating some with new ideas, and I've used that from time to time of just generate a list of new ideas on this particular project or whatever. As long as it's a servant, I never want it to be a master in my life or anyone else's.
Amen. That's good. That's good. Yeah. Well, I want to take you up on the offer to kind of flip the script here and let you ask me some questions and just kind of try to save me about just, I don't know, 10 minutes at the very end. I want to come back and conclude my conversation with you.
Sure. Yeah. And Brian, again, the goal isn't to throw any curveballs your way or no gotcha questions, but it's simply to, allow me to get to know you a little bit more and maybe live out in real time some of the theoretical sides of questions to be able to think through this. So I'm curious, Brian, you've had this podcast going for a while. What's your dream with this podcast? Let's assume, no holds barred, like it just goes crazy. What do you dream of it happening? Whether it's numbers or stories or impact. What do you dream for your podcast?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. I've never thought of this. Obviously, would you like it to be huge, like Joe Rogan or something? Sure, but my dream for this has been simply to be able to talk to interesting people and authors of that I've liked. I want, from a practical theological perspective, for the podcast to, since I'm from the Wesleyan holiness side of the Christian family, I have consistently tried to talk to people about what John Wesley thought was sort of the pinnacle of the Wesleyan message, which is holiness of heart and life. So I've tried to consistently wove that thread all the way through, and I do, and I like to use it as kind of a vehicle to share the sort of things that I do as well. I mean, I have a coaching consulting practice I do myself, and so I don't do hardcore marketing. It's usually word of mouth. But I do have some podcast episodes that at least give a sense of what where I come from in my own life and some of the things that I've learned that might be helpful to others as a way of saying, hey, maybe I'll reach out to Brian and maybe he can help me work through some hard things. So that's not a focused answer, but that's kind of a spectrum and a circle of things that hit my dream. And I'd say it's dream fulfilled and still enjoyed as much as I did when I first started.
Yeah, great. So, Brian, I don't know you super well, but I know before we recorded that you said you've had a lot of hard things happen in your life. I certainly don't want to press into something that might be too vulnerable or uncomfortable for you, but I'm curious, and this is wildly theoretical and hypothetical. I'm curious, how different do you think you would be if you didn't go through a lot of these hardships?
Yeah, it's always the fun one. Well, the initial hardship started when I was 21 months old, so I have no idea how it would be different at that
Mm.
point, other though because I've had to deal with that. And 2 episodes ago, I just actually had a profound healing of that after 54
Wow.
years, which was crazy.
Wow.
So we'll see what happens now. But in general, I mean, the answer is pretty easy, though it's not easy to live into. All hardships have the opportunity of either breaking a person or allowing them to open up and allowing God to, grow them back and grow deeper roots. And so I would not be who I am today. I wouldn't probably have the podcast going if I wouldn't have gone through some hard things, though sometimes I wish I wouldn't have gone through the hard things.
Do you mind if I double click a little bit on that idea of healing? So, 54 years and just 2 episodes ago, there was healing there.
Yes.
How did that? I don't know what your background is in terms of what you thought about healing before that occurred, but I'm curious, how has your faith been impacted recently just since this has happened? 54 years and God works in healing. Has your own faith or your own doctrine or belief system regarding the role of the Spirit and healing changed at all?
Um, I guess not really. I, other than being surprised that something could happen, from, literally 54 and a half years ago. And again, the issue is like I had something really bad happen to me in a hospital when I was like 21 months old that I
Mm.
actually remember, which is crazy. And then literally like 6 weeks ago today, I had a surgery again and it was bringing up a lot of stuff and I knew it. And so I had hatched a plan
Mm.
while having the surgery to at least open up the possibility of facing what happened to me when I was a little kid and maybe having a better experience this time around. And so that was mission accomplished. Now, the thing that surprised me was, just to make a long story short, is I had this vivid memory and it's true because my mom has verified that this was a true memory, that when I was 21, that I was 21 months old, trapped in a crib with a nurse screaming.
Mm.
And I've always been able to see myself terrified holding on to the rails.
Mm.
Um, After the surgery, well, when I was in the operating room, I visualized that on purpose right before I went under. And then I just kind of visualized myself trying to show up in that same room to comfort my little self because I didn't want my sympathetic nervous system to be going crazy while I was under anesthesia. I know this kind of sounds weird, but this was my little
No,
plan.
no, this is good.
And so I had a great experience at the hospital the whole day. So I kind of got my medical fears because I hadn't had surgery since I was a little kid either. But a few days later, while I was doing centering prayer, which I do every day, I had a new vision and I started having that old memory again, except my little baby self was jumping up and down with a huge smile on his face.
Wow. Wow.
And, obviously I had a very emotional breakdown at that point, and I felt free, and I felt joy that I'm not going to say I've never been happy because that's a lie, but I just felt a real joy. And I remember thinking, geez, what am I going to do now? And in the little baby version, in this little vision, I even said, well, you can do whatever you want, but you can have more fun doing it than being afraid that something's going to happen all the time. Because yeah, that's kind of what happened. It was kind of it was crazy. It was powerful. And what I think the lesson there theologically was allow God to astonish you, and
Mm.
don't ever underestimate what God can do or how long it might actually take to have something happen. That's a long time.
So one of the questions I was going to ask as a follow-up was, how do you steward well what has happened to you 6 weeks ago? But it sounds like you may have answered a bit of that already. Of like, don't be surprised when God astonishes us. What are the barriers that keep others, and maybe this is more personal for you, what are the barriers that keep you from being astonished by God in the ways in which he works in his goodness?
Yeah, and I love the word astonished because that's a reminder for me.
Mm,
That I need to, especially as Bible professor, it's easy. I've read this a million times, all that kind of
mm,
stuff. Well, you said one of the words. It's to cultivate curiosity,
mm.
and just have that as a value, which again, easier said than done sometimes. But I think a practice that I do, and I use a lot of via negativa spiritual practices. So centering prayer helps me to never get false illusions about myself. That I think keeps a level of humility, though I would never say I'm humble because that would not be very humble, right? So I think that keeps me dependent on God, and I think that's probably the key thing to wanting to be astonished, and is that you have to recognize that God is as far away from us as trying to paddle out to the horizon, yet at the same time, God is continually close to us. And so we need to be able to recognize we're on a journey, that it's probably all of all eternity, all infinity. And as long as you remember that, oh, I haven't made it yet, there's still more to go. I think that's probably the key to being astonished. And then I change things up. I call this decentering practice. I try to drive a different way when I go somewhere. I just do things to cross up my patterns so
Mm.
that things can be fresh. So the greatest hindrance to all this is always myself. But as long
Mm.
as I practice my rule of life, make sure when I read scripture, even if I think I know it, and actually, I try to, when I do my text work in the morning, I try to pretend that the text wants to ask me questions instead of me
Oh,
wanting
I
to ask
love
it
that.
questions. And so I
Love
try to
that.
imagine what's the hardest thing that like Paul would ask me after I've read the passage.
Mm.
And that keeps me astonished and dependent and needy and wanting more from God.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, Brian, there's so many things we could double click on, but it reminds me of something one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, she said, instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it.
That's good. I like
Right?
that.
Yeah, yeah. And so that idea of astonishment and keeping things fresh, mixing things up. I learned this a lot from Leonard Sweet as well,
Mm.
who taught me, hey, don't get in a rut, JR. You can have rhythms. Don't get in a rut. They'll make you old fast. And I've always appreciated that. I'm curious. You mentioned rule of life. This is becoming more and more popular in evangelical circles, even though it's been around for centuries. I'm curious. People that may be hearing that may say, yeah, I get it. And others may say, oh, is that Catholic? That sounds too rigid. Is that works based? What would you say to somebody who is maybe hearing about a rule of life, but say, Brian, how would it benefit me? Or how does it benefit you? And why should I seriously consider having a rule of life? How would you respond to maybe it's a student of yours or a listener of this podcast? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I use different language too. I'll call it spiritual rhythms.
Hmm.
Means of grace. That would be a
Hmm.
traditional Methodist kind of a term. Devotions.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would say what it is it basically gives us a container for our lives because we're finite beings, and so it gives us our guardrails. And it's the means by which God can continue to do the deep work in us so that God then can do the deep work that he wants to do through us. And so
Oh,
it's really just intentional living that keeps enough inputs from God into our lives.
mm, yeah, great. So, what would be some of those specific elements that you have in your rule of life?
Yeah, well, my rule of life is pretty simple. I mean, I wake up super early, and so I always do. I call it I just call it scripture work. I get up and mess around with the Bible for between 15 minutes and an hour every morning, depending on, I don't use an alarm. So when I wake up and just kind of get rolling on, and then I do a block of centering prayer with my wife after she wakes up, pray throughout the day. Um, I do a journaling practice in the morning. I have my own kind of abbreviated version of an examine where essentially I've been doing this for years now. Wake up, it's 5 things I'm grateful for. I ask a really hard question of myself. It's like I notice any sensations in my body, and I just like what
Mm,
seems to be bothering me.
mm,
And that's like a lament prayer that I can write down whatever that is. And, at different points in my life that can go on for a while, but lets you get everything dumped out. And then it's like, what do I want, or what would make this a really good day today?
mm. Great question.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been playing around even the last 6 weeks, just to go back to the healing thing. I think about my little self. I call him little Bry. So,
Mm.
and so like, I've been asking myself the last 6 weeks, what would make little Bry really happy with big Bry today?
Oh, that is another fantastic question.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
So you mentioned that you teach and you've been teaching for a while. I'm curious, students change, and I noticed that, and I haven't taught nearly as long as you have, but I'm curious, how are students different today than when you first started teaching?
yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. It is. I've always, because I'm not on the main Wilmore campus, most of the students have been tended to always be older. So they've always a lot second career people. So in a sense, there hasn't been a lot of shifting with second career people because they've had some life lived in them. The thing that I have noticed, and this probably has more to do with how I've changed, because I've gotten very much into contemplative spirituality the last 14 years, is I've noticed younger people are very much more interested in spiritual formation than perhaps my impression was that they used to be, and that they're very open to doing what I never would have done, which was say, hey, want to come and do centering prayer 40 minutes before class starts, and I'll get sometimes half the class will show up. I teach intensive, so it's not like this is every day, so it's just a couple times. But I guess that's been the biggest surprise. I think the biggest challenge is mostly how when I was a student, you'd go to class, 2 or 3 times a week of the same class. Again, my contacts mostly teach hybrids or fully online now. Well, exclusively hybrids or fully online is what I teach. And I've noticed, I think students have higher expectations, I think, for video quality or even class materials than maybe that I would have in the past. I don't see that as a bad thing, but I think that's the biggest change, and I think that's simply because the internet and the wide array of materials that are available to us. That challenges me to kind of up my game. I would say that's probably been the biggest thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, thanks for letting me turn the tables on you and flip the script a little bit here. And yeah, thanks. I learned a great deal about your life and your story. And yeah, I'm so grateful that God has brought about healing 6 weeks ago after 54 years. I
I know, pretty
celebrate that
crazy.
with you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. It was pretty crazy. Yeah, yeah. It was amazing.
Mm.
Yeah. Just to kind of wrap things up, these are the questions that I like to ask. And you may have answered this first one just with the questions book, but I like to ask authors, especially if there's another project, and in particular, if there's a book that you've always been afraid to write that you haven't.
That's a great question, Brian. What's fascinating is, as I mentioned, I've written, co-written, or contributed to 15 books, and each time I'm writing a current book, I'm always thinking about the next one. And this is the first time ever, and it doesn't surprise me because this is my passion project. There isn't one currently on the radar. Now, I'm okay with that, but it's a weird feeling because for 20, 20 years, I've always had the next one in my mind on deck, ready to go. And I don't have a man on deck right now while I'm at bat. And that's okay. And I'm grateful for this message. And I'm committed to seeing this message get out because I believe in the power of questions so much and that we can actually follow Jesus better and have a better example, more clear example of him in the world as we ask better questions. So this is the first time in my adult life where I just haven't had something next. And I'm okay with that. They may change. I'm grateful for that. But if this is the last one in me, I'm okay with that.
Well, 15 books is a lot, so that's good for you, and we will see what the Lord has for you for sure. This is a question you asked me actually, but I ask every guest, like what actually keeps you grounded? Do you have a kind of a set of rhythms or rule of life that you keep?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a big fan of spiritual rhythms and practices. I hate ruts, but I can't imagine not living into rhythms. And so part of that entails things like I've got a reading chair in the sunroom. It's my place that I meet with the Lord. It's very similar to you. I do 5 things I'm grateful for, but I try to turn it into a prayer. So first thing I do with my coffee in hand is put a date on the page and write gratitude at the top and say, number 1, God, I'm grateful for ... Number 2, God, I'm grateful for. So I want to turn it into a prayer rather than just listing things. So that's important. I read a psalm, I read a proverb, and one of the things I've been doing the last several years is hand copying the New Testament. And so I am 8 chapters away from finishing Revelation, and so it's been very few things do I work on just about every day for a decade. This is one of those things, and so I'm kind of eager to hear from the Lord in these next few weeks what will happen when I'm actually done hand copying. And some people say, you'll do the Old Testament, right? I don't think so. I really am grateful for doing the New Testament, but I'm excited to see what my new rhythms will be. I just have hand copied 10 verses a day for, like I said, for almost a decade. So that'll be unique. That'll be unique for me to see what's next and what God may have for me and how I engage with the scriptures. So that's really important. And then I usually head to the gym after dropping my son off at school. And for me, I swim. I'm not a very fast swimmer. I'll never make an Olympic team, but I find that I pray best not when I fold my hands and close my eyes and bow my head in my office. I do it when I'm walking, for prayer walking. I do it with my pen in hand when I'm journaling and when I'm swimming. Because doing a mile, which is about 35, 36 laps, it can get boring. And so each lap becomes a different person or issue to pray for, whether it's, what's happening in Israel and Gaza these days, or whether it's my next door neighbor or my 2 sons or my wife. It just allows some ways to pray. So those are some practices that have remained with me, especially in the morning. The morning becomes very important to me to make sure I'm grounded and centered on the rest of the day.
Yeah, I like that. Now, this may be the hardest question that you'll ever be asked here. We'll see, because since I'm in this, and it's this one outside of the Bible itself. What are two to three books that have shaped you deeply?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say 2 or 3 of the best. I can give you 2 or 3 that have shaped me deeply. And maybe I'll skirt the question a little bit of who are the authors that have shaped me deeply.
That's easy enough, yeah.
So no one has had more of an influence on my ministry life than Eugene Peterson. He was a mentor of mine for 12 years before he passed away.
Oh, wow.
And pen pal relationship, and he invited me, he and his wife Jan, to come out and spend time with them in Montana. He's, of course, passed away a handful of years ago, but I still miss him. I think about him almost every week. Dallas Willard has had a huge impact on my life as well. So many of his books, and he's no longer with us, but he still remains in my head and my heart, and a lot of his teachings and writings. Henry Nouwen as well has been a huge influence. I try to read In the Name of Jesus at least once a year as a way of staying sharp in that. But those are some great Christian thinkers and authors that have helped me immensely. On the secular side of things, I am I love Malcolm Gladwell, and I love reading great biographies and learning from leaders. Those always influence me tremendously. But there is a book called Essentialism and another book called Deep Work, and both of those have helped me immensely in terms of focused thinking and being very clear on where and how I spend my time. So doing less but better. and rather than the tyranny of doing more but diluting the quality of that. So those books have been wildly influential on how I organize my days, my weeks, and my months.
That's good. Those are, yeah, we have a lot in common. I've read, I like both of those books too. Those Cal Newport, I forget what the other guy's name is, but those are both
Yeah,
really good books.
Greg McEwen, yeah,
Yeah,
wrote
that's good.
Essentialism. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, final question. So people want to pick up a copy of The Art of Asking Better Questions or get in contact connection with you, maybe to hire you as a coach or for a speaking engagement. Where's the best place to get the book? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, the book can be found anywhere that fine books are sold, whether online or in person. And as far as myself, some of the easiest ways to get a hold of me, I'm on social media, but jrbriggs.com. And then our organization is kairospartnerships.org, KAIROS, kairospartnerships.org.
And just so we maybe have another minute here. So you have like Kairos University. Is that related to Kairos partnerships or is that something different?
Yeah, it's something different. Yeah, it's a obviously Kairos is a great word, and Kairos. We just happen
Okay.
to say Kairos for a little bit easier to say. But yeah, Kairos University. It's online. It's a great word. It's not something we created.
Okay.
They
Okay.
reached out and asked if I would help and be a faculty mentor with them, and have served in that capacity for a little bit. So yeah, in fact, there's lots of Kairos organizations and ministries and networks out there. It's a good Greek word.
Okay. I see. I thought you were the founder of a university, perhaps, or whatever. So I was just curious.
No, no, no.
Okay, that's cool. Well, anyway, I want to say thank you very much. This was a really fun conversation. Again, great book, and it was actually fun just kind of letting you ask me some questions. So thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, I learned a great deal, and my faith was strengthened just hearing about your own healing story, and it helps me anticipate and expect. I know that God's on the move, but to help me anticipate and expect that even more. So, thanks for this time together.
Amen. And thank you, everyone, for listening all the way to the end of this week's episode. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.